The corrupted king did not charge. He simply walked down the dais steps, the sound of his armored boots echoing like hammer strikes against a coffin lid. Clang. Clang. With each step, the violet crystal mask that replaced his face pulsed, sending ripples of distortion through the air. Kaelen tightened his grip on his sword, feeling the vibration in his teeth. "Spread out," Kaelen barked. "Don't let him focus on all of us at once." Kara slammed her staff into the marble floor, pulling up a jagged wall of obsidian to shield them. The king raised a gauntleted hand. He didn't cast a spell, he simply clenched his fist. The obsidian wall shattered instantly into dust, as if gravity had increased 1,000-fold in that single spot. "Gravity magic," Kara hissed, stumbling back as the shockwave hit her. "He is anchoring the weight of the mountain to his will." Kaelen didn't wait for an explanation. He charged. It was a suicide run, but he needed to draw fire. He sprinted in a zigzag pattern, dodging the invisible crushing zones that cracked the floor tiles where he had been a split second before. He reached the king and swung his sword in a two-handed arc aimed at the neck. The king didn't block. He caught the blade. With one hand, the steel screeched as the gauntlet squeezed. The king twisted his wrist. Kaelen's sword snapped. The sound was like a gunshot. Kaelen was left holding a useless hilt. The king backhanded him, a casual, dismissive blow that felt like being hit by a siege ram. Kaelen flew across the room, smashing into a stone pillar. He crumbled to the floor, gasping, ribs screaming in agony. The king turned his crystal gaze toward Alara. "The vessel," the entity spoke, the voice vibrating in their skulls. "You are leaking. Let me seal you." He reached out, and Alara was lifted off the ground, her throat constricted by invisible fingers. "Let her go!" Tibbs screamed. The goblin scrambled up the side of the throne, holding the only weapon he had, a wrench. He leaped from the high back of the chair, landing on the king's shoulders. He started hammering the crystal mask with manic fury. Tink, tink, tink. It was like hitting diamond with a spoon, but it was annoying. The king roared, a sound of grinding tectonic plates, and reached up to grab the goblin. Tibbs bit the metal finger. "Tastes like rust," Tibbs yelled, before being thrown across the room like a rag doll. The distraction worked. Alara dropped to the floor, coughing. Kara seized the moment. She didn't try to attack the king. She attacked the floor. She sang a high, piercing note. The marble beneath the king turned to liquid mud. The heavy armor dragged him down. He sank to his knees, struggling against the sudden loss of footing. "Now, Kaelen!" Kara shouted. Kaelen was already moving. He abandoned the broken sword. He drew the star-steel dagger, the one from the wreckage of the coast. It was small, but it was made of the same material as the architect's prison. Kaelen slid on his knees through the mud, dodging a clumsy swipe from the king. He jammed the dagger into the gap of the king's armor, right under the armpit. He twisted. The star steel didn't cut flesh, it cut the connection. The violet light in the king's mask flickered. The gravity field collapsed. The king let out a shriek that shattered the stained glass windows high above. He thrashed, throwing Kaelen off, but the dagger remained stuck in the joint, glowing with a nullifying white light. The king rose from the mud, ripping the dagger out and throwing it aside. But he was damaged. He limped. The crystal mask was cracked. "Insolence," the entity growled. "If you will not bow, you will join the Foundation." He raised both hands. The entire castle shook. The doors to the courtyard burst open. The stone army, now fully awake Hollow Knights, poured in. Hundreds of them. Violet eyes glowing in the dark. They flooded the room like a sea of iron. Kaelen scrambled back to his friends. They were backed against the dais, 4 against a legion. "We need a bottleneck," Kaelen shouted. "Kara, the throne!" The throne of the High King was a massive block of granite. Kara nodded. She slammed her staff. The throne slid forward, blocking the narrow stairwell behind the dais. "Behind it!" Kaelen ordered. They scrambled over the stone seat and into the narrow servants' passage behind the throne. It was a tight squeeze. Kaelen shoved Tibbs and Alara in first, then turned to help Kara. A Hollow Knight lunged, swinging an axe. Kaelen caught the haft with his bare hands, adrenaline overriding the pain, and kicked the knight in the chest. They retreated into the passage, Kara collapsing the entrance behind them with a wave of her hand. The sound of stone grinding against stone sealed them in. They were in the dark again, but they could hear the army on the other side hacking at the rock. Clang! Crunch! It won't hold forever, Kaelen said, leaning against the wall, gasping. He was bruised, bloody, and weaponless, save for a boot knife. Where does this go? The royal ossuary, Alara said, her hand on the wall. I can feel the dead, they are restless. They moved deeper. The passage opened into a circular chamber lined with vertical coffins, the resting place of the kings of old. But the coffins were open. The bodies were gone. In the center of the room was a machine. It looked like a smaller version of the clockwork heart, but this one was made of bone and crystal. It was pulsing. Thump, thump. The amplifier, Tibbs whispered, creeping closer. It's broadcasting the signal. That's how he controls the army. If we break it, the army falls? Kaelen asked. Maybe, Tibbs said, opening a panel on the machine. Or maybe the feedback scrambles their brains and makes them go berserk. It's a coin toss. I like those odds, Kaelen said. He looked for something heavy to smash it with. He found a ceremonial mace on the floor. Do it. Tibbs shook his head. Mechanical smash won't work. It's shielded. See the rune field? He pointed to a faint shimmer around the machine. Magic smash. Alara stepped forward. I can overload it, she said. I still have the architect's charge inside me. If I pour it into this, it's like putting a waterfall into a teacup. Kaelen grabbed her shoulder. And what happens to the teacup? It shatters, she said. And what happens to the waterfall? He looked at her translucent skin. She smiled weakly. It flows into the sea. It becomes free. Kaelen realized what she was saying. She wouldn't survive the discharge. She would dissipate. No, Kaelen said. We find another way. There is no other way, Kaelen, she cried. Listen to them! She pointed up. The sound of the army breaking through the throne room barrier was getting louder, and another sound, a deep, resonant booming from the walls. The king was coming. He was tearing the castle apart to get to them. I was made for this, Alara said. I am the architect's apology to the world. Suddenly, the wall of the ossuary exploded inward. Not the door they entered, but the solid stone wall. The king burst through, wreathed in violet flame. He didn't use a door, he walked through the masonry. He looked damaged. His armor cracked, his mask chipped, but his power was unchecked. He raised his hand and Kaelen was pinned to the wall by gravity. Kara was thrown to the floor. Tibbs scrambled under the machine. The king focused on Alara. Found you, the entity hissed. You will not break the cycle, the king intoned, stepping toward the machine. You will join it. He reached for Alara. She didn't back away. She grabbed the king's hand. It was a shock to the entity. He froze. Alara's chest plate spun up to a whine. I'm not joining you, she said, her voice layering over itself, a chorus of power. I'm erasing you. She didn't pour the energy into the machine. She poured it into him. The king screamed. It wasn't a battle of strength. It was a battle of frequencies. The violet corruption was a dissonant chord. Alara was a pure sine wave. The white light flooded the king's armor, burning out the corruption from the inside. The violet crystal mask began to turn white. But the king fought back. He grabbed Alara's throat with his other hand, squeezing. I am the mountain, he roared. Kaelen, pinned to the wall, felt his ribs cracking. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He could only watch. Tibbs, Kaelen wheezed. The machine! The goblin was under the amplifier. He looked at the king, then at the machine. He understood. The king was connected to the amplifier. If the machine broke while they were linked, feedback. Tibbs didn't have a weapon. He had a wrench. He jammed the wrench into the exposed gears of the bone machine. Crunch! The gears seized. The machine shrieked. The feedback loop was instantaneous. The machine exploded, sending a shockwave of raw magic through the room. The link to the king snapped. The backlash hit him like a lightning bolt. He released Alara and was thrown backward, smashing into the stone sarcophagi. His armor fused solid. The crystal mask shattered into 1,000 pieces, revealing not a face, but a hollow void of smoke that dissipated in the air. The king fell. The gravity spell broke. Kaelen dropped to the floor. Kaelen crawled to Alara. She was lying on the stone floor. She wasn't glowing anymore. She wasn't translucent. She was just a girl, pale, still, and small. Her chest plate was dark, a dead piece of metal. Kaelen checked for a pulse. It was faint, fluttering like a dying bird. Alara, he whispered, wake up. Kara limped over, clutching her side. She knelt and touched the girl's forehead. The vessel is empty, she said softly. She gave it all. The castle began to shake. Deep, structural rumbles. The mountain, Kara said, looking up at the cracking ceiling. The king anchored the castle with his magic. Without him, the foundations are failing. They had to leave, now. But the way back was blocked by the stone army, now deactivated but piling the corridors with tons of scrap metal. Is there another way out? Kaelen asked, lifting Alara into his arms. Kara pointed to a drainage grate in the floor. The aqueduct. It leads to the waterfall. They pried the grate open and dropped into the icy water below. It was a dark, fast-moving flume carved into the rock. They slid down the tunnel, water rushing over them, freezing and terrifying. It was a ride through the veins of the mountain. Kaelen held Alara tight, keeping her head above the water. Tibbs rode on Kara's shoulders. They picked up speed, the tunnel angling sharply downward. They were hurtling toward the exit. The tunnel ended abruptly. They shot out into the open air. They were halfway down the mountain, ejecting from a gargoyle's mouth that served as a drainage spout. Below them was the White River, a ribbon of frothing water hundreds of feet down. They fell. It was a long, silent drop. Kaelen twisted in the air, trying to break the water with his feet, shielding Alara. The wind roared. Then, impact. The cold was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Kaelen surfaced, gasping, fighting the current. He saw Alara's dress floating nearby. He grabbed her and swam for the bank. Kara was already there, dragging Tibbs out of the shallows. Kaelen hauled Alara onto the snowy bank and collapsed. He rolled her over and pumped her chest. Come on, he begged. Don't you dare die on me now. He pressed, again, water spilled from her lips. She coughed, a ragged, beautiful sound. They lay on the riverbank, shivering, watching the citadel. High above, the fortress was dying. The towers crumbled, sliding off the mountain face in slow motion. The cloud of dust was massive. The seat of the High King, the last bastion of the north, was gone. But so was the silence. The violet fog that had shrouded the peak was dissipating, burned away by the morning sun. The air was clear. Kaelen sat up, wrapping his cloak around Alara. She was awake, her eyes open, staring at the ruin. It's over, she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. Kaelen looked at her. Her eyes were different. One was blue, the other was gold, mechanical gold like the architect's. A shard of the knowledge had remained. The army is gone, Kaelen said. The king is gone. We won. Alara shook her head slowly. We broke the receiver, she said, but the broadcast, it's still out there. Kara stood up, leaning on her staff. The silence has retreated, she said, for now, but the north is lost. It is a wasteland. She looked south. We must go to the Sunlands. We must warn the Empress. Kaelen groaned, standing up. Every inch of him hurt. I'm a courier, he muttered. I deliver messages. I guess I have one more delivery to make. He looked at Tibbs. The goblin was shivering, blue-lipped, and I need to find a warm fire for my engineer. They began to walk south, away from the ruin, away from the grave of the king. They were no longer a random collection of survivors. They were a unit, a courier, a vessel, a singer, and a builder. As they crested the first ridge, Kaelen looked back one last time. A single beam of violet light shot up from the rubble of the castle, piercing the sky, and then vanished. A signal or a farewell. The beam didn't just vanish, it hit something. High in the atmosphere, unseen by the naked eye, a massive shape shifted in the stars. A shadow hulk, an orbital fortress. It had lost its anchor. It began to move, turning its sensors away from the north, scanning the globe for a new weakness. The silence was not a phenomenon. It was an invasion. And the war had only just begun. Back on the ground, Kaelen didn't see the ship. He only felt the wind change. It was warmer. He adjusted his pack. Alara took his hand. She didn't glow, but she felt warm. What do we tell them? She asked. When we get to the Empress. Kaelen squeezed her hand. We tell them the truth, he said. We tell them that the silence is loud, and it's hungry. They walked into the tree line, leaving the snow behind. The forest was green, untouched by the corruption. Birds sang. It sounded impossibly loud after the silence of the north. Kaelen took a deep breath of pine and earth. He was alive. He touched the pouch at his belt where he kept his letters. He had failed his original delivery, but he had saved the address. That counted for something.